Scary telling.
I had a ring my mom gave me many years ago. It was a beautiful silver ring with a small diamond in the center. It was simple, but it meant the world to me. I wore it every day for years until one day I realized it was gone. At first, I wasn't too worried. I thought maybe I had just misplaced it or left it somewhere. But as the days went on and I couldn't find it, I started to panic. I looked everywhere, in my car, in my house, in all the places I had been recently. But it was nowhere to be found. I was heartbroken. That ring was the last thing I had from my mom, who had passed away a few years prior. It was like losing a piece of her all over again. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that maybe someone had taken it. One night, I had a dream. In the dream, I was walking through a dark forest, and I saw a figure in the distance. It was a woman, and she was wearing my ring. I ran towards her, but she disappeared before I could get to her. When I woke up, I felt like the dream was a sign, like I was meant to find the ring. The next day, I started searching again. But this time, I decided to try something different. I contacted a psychic who specialized in finding lost objects. I was skeptical at first, but I was desperate. The psychic came to my house and did her thing. She held my hands and closed her eyes, and I could see her brow furrowing as if she was deep in thought. After a few minutes, she opened her eyes and told me that the ring was still in my possession, but that it had been taken by someone close to me. I was shocked. I couldn't think of anyone who would do something like that. But the psychic insisted that I should trust my intuition, that I would know who it was when I saw them. Days went by, and I couldn't stop thinking about what the psychic had said. And then, one day, I saw her. It was my best friend, Sarah. She was wearing my ring. I confronted her about it, and she broke down in tears. She told me that she had taken it, that she had been going through a rough time and had wanted something to hold on to. She promised to give it back, and she did. But our friendship was never the same. After that, I thought the nightmare was over. But it was only the beginning. A few days later, I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of tapping on my window. At first, I thought it was just a tree branch, but then I saw a figure standing outside. It was a woman, and she was wearing my ring. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The woman just stared at me, her eyes piercing. And then she disappeared, just like in my dream. I was terrified. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat. I felt like I was losing my mind. And then, the tapping started again. Every night, at the same time, the woman would appear outside my window. I went to the police, but they couldn't do anything. They said there was no evidence of anyone outside my window, that I was just imagining things. But I knew what I saw. And I knew that the woman was after me. One night, I woke up to find the woman standing at the foot of my bed. She was holding my ring out to me, and I could see that her face was twisted into a grotesque smile. I screamed and ran out of my house, not looking back until I was blocks away. I didn't know what to do or where to go. I was being haunted by a ghost, and I didn't know how to stop it. Days turned into weeks, and the woman in the ring continued to torment me. I couldn't escape her, no matter where I went. I even tried to sell the ring, but no one would take it. It was like it was cursed, like it was bound to me forever. One day, I was walking down the street when I saw an old woman sitting on a bench. She was holding a crystal, and I could feel the energy emanating from it. She looked up at me and smiled, and I knew that she could help me. I approached her, and she told me that she was a healer, that she could help me break the curse on the ring. I didn't know if I believed her, but I was desperate. She took the ring from me and held it up to the sun. She closed her eyes and muttered some words under her breath. And then, she handed the ring back to me. I put the ring on my finger, and I could feel a weight lifting from my shoulders. The woman in the ring was gone, and I was free. From that day on, I never saw the woman again. The curse was broken, and I could finally move on. But I knew that I would never forget the terror I felt when I lost that ring and the haunting that followed. I never believed in the paranormal until the day my daughter died. Her name was Lily, and she was only 6 years old when she passed away from leukemia. It was a devastating loss, one that still haunts me to this day. After Lily died, strange things started happening in my house. Every night, at exactly 3 a.m., I would hear her crying and screaming from her bedroom. I would rush to her room, but she wouldn't be there. Instead, the sound seemed to be coming from outside, from the graveyard next to our house. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. I was grieving, and my mind was playing tricks on me. But then, the crying and screaming continued every night, and it became louder and more intense. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to visit Lily's grave and ask her to stop. I grabbed a flashlight and walked through the graveyard, searching for her tombstone. When I finally found it, I knelt down and spoke to her. "Lily, please stop crying," I said. "You're scaring me." But the crying continued, and it only grew louder. I felt a chill run down my spine, and I realized that something was wrong. Lily's grave was shaking, and the earth beneath me was trembling. Suddenly, I heard a voice whisper in my ear. It was Lily's voice, but it sounded distorted and twisted. "Daddy," she said, "why did you let me die?" I jumped back in horror and shone my flashlight around, but I couldn't see anything. The crying continued, and it grew more intense. I realized that I had to leave the graveyard and go back to my house. But as I turned to leave, I saw something moving in the corner of my eye. It was a figure, a dark shape that seemed to be following me. I started running, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't dare look back. When I got home, I locked all the doors and windows and tried to calm down. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, something evil and malevolent. The crying and screaming continued every night, and I knew that I had to do something about it. I contacted a paranormal investigator, and she agreed to come to my house to investigate. When she arrived, she brought all sorts of equipment, including cameras, audio recorders, and EMF meters. We spent the entire night in my daughter's room, waiting for something to happen. At exactly 3 a.m., the crying and screaming started. It was louder than ever before, and the investigator turned on her equipment. We could hear strange voices coming through the audio recorder, and the EMF meter was going crazy. Suddenly, we heard a voice whispering in Lily's room. It was the same distorted voice that I had heard in the graveyard. "Daddy, why did you let me die?" it said. The investigator quickly analyzed the audio and discovered that the voice belonged to a demon. She told me that it was using my daughter's voice to lure me into its trap. We spent the rest of the night trying to get rid of the demon. We used sage, holy water, and prayers, but nothing seemed to work. The demon was too powerful. Eventually, the crying and screaming stopped, and the demon disappeared. But I knew that it was only a matter of time before it returned. Now, every night, I visit my daughter's grave and pray for her soul. I hope that she's at peace, and I hope that the demon never returns. But I can still hear her crying and screaming in my dreams, and I know that I will never forget the terror that I experienced in that haunted graveyard. As a child, I always loved looking at the old pictures in my grandmother's house. There was one in particular that caught my attention, a portrait of my great-grandmother, Elizabeth. She was a beautiful woman with striking features and a gentle smile. I would often stare at the portrait for hours, wondering about her life and the secrets she held. But as I grew older, something about the portrait began to disturb me. It wasn't anything obvious at first, just a feeling of unease that crept over me whenever I looked at it. And then one day, I noticed something strange. Elizabeth seemed closer to the camera than before. It was as if she had moved, or the portrait itself had shifted. I rubbed my eyes, thinking it was just my imagination, but when I looked again, she was still closer than before. Over the next few weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the portrait. Whenever I walked by it, I felt as if Elizabeth's eyes were following me, watching me. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling only grew stronger. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to take the portrait down and examine it closely. As I removed it from the wall, I felt a chill run down my spine. It was as if the air around me had grown colder. When I looked at the portrait up close, I realized that something was terribly wrong. Elizabeth's eyes seemed to be alive, almost glowing in the dim light of my room. And then I saw it. Her mouth was moving, as if she was trying to speak. I stumbled back in horror, dropping the portrait to the floor. It shattered into a million pieces, but I couldn't look away. Elizabeth's face seemed to be coming alive, twisting and contorting into a grotesque mask. Suddenly, I heard a voice whispering in my ear. It was Elizabeth's voice, but it was distorted and twisted, like something out of a nightmare. "Hello, my dear," she said. "I've been waiting for you." I tried to run, but something was holding me back. It was as if I was rooted to the spot, unable to move. Elizabeth's voice grew louder, filling my head with her terrible words. "I've been waiting for you, my dear," she said. "And now you're mine." I screamed, trying to break free, but it was no use. Elizabeth had me in her grasp, and there was nothing I could do to escape. The next thing I knew, I woke up in a hospital bed. The doctors told me that I had been in a coma for weeks, ever since the night I had taken down the portrait. They said that I had suffered a severe head injury and that I was lucky to be alive. But I knew the truth. Elizabeth had taken me to the other side, into a world of darkness and pain. And now she was waiting for me, always watching, always waiting. I never spoke of the portrait again, but I could still feel her presence even after I left my grandmother's house. Elizabeth had become a part of me, a dark and twisted memory that haunted me for the rest of my life. And I knew that I could never escape her, no matter how hard I tried. The haunted portrait of my great-grandmother would always be with me, a reminder of the horrors that lay just beyond our world. I was born into a religious cult, and for most of my childhood, I knew nothing else. Our small community was located in a remote area, surrounded by dense forests and mountains. My family and I were deeply committed to the cult's beliefs, and we never questioned the strange practices and rituals that took place there. However, as I grew older, I began to notice strange occurrences happening around me. My family and I experienced things that couldn't be explained by logic or reason. The supernatural events in the cult started with strange noises in the night, whispers that sounded like they were coming from inside the walls, and doors that would slam shut on their own. But as time went on, things became more sinister. My younger sister would wake up in the middle of the night, screaming and writhing in pain. She would often talk about seeing shadowy figures lurking in the corners of her room. My parents tried everything to calm her down, but nothing seemed to work. One night, I woke up to find my sister standing at the foot of my bed, staring at me with eyes that looked like they belonged to someone else. She whispered something in a language that I couldn't understand, and then suddenly collapsed on the floor, foaming at the mouth. I screamed for my parents, and we rushed her to the cult's infirmary, where she was treated by one of the cult's leaders. But things only got worse from there. We started seeing ghostly apparitions around the compound, and strange symbols began appearing on the walls of our home. The cult leaders told us that these were signs of a great spiritual awakening, but I knew deep down that something was seriously wrong. One night, while we were all gathered in the main hall for a ritual, a violent windstorm suddenly erupted outside. The windows shattered, and the candles went out, plunging us into total darkness. I felt something cold and clammy wrap around my leg, and I screamed for help as I was dragged towards the center of the room. In the flickering light of the candles that had somehow reignited, I saw a shadowy figure standing over me, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. I felt a cold breath on my neck, and I knew that this was no ordinary entity. My family and I managed to escape the cult that night, but we never forgot the horrors we experienced there. To this day, we still hear strange noises in the night, and we see things that we can't explain. I don't know if it's the ghosts of our former cult members coming back to haunt us, or something even more sinister, but I know that we can never forget the evil that we witnessed in that place. The haunting of the cult will stay with us forever. I never believed in ghosts or the supernatural until my family inherited my grandparents' old cabin in the woods. It was a beautiful place, surrounded by trees and wildlife, and I loved spending summers there as a child. But as I grew older, I started to notice strange things happening at the cabin. It started with small things, like doors creaking open and shut on their own, or the sound of footsteps coming from the attic when no one was up there. I tried to brush it off as my imagination, but deep down, I knew there was something off about the place. Then one summer, everything changed. It was the day my grandfather died. I remember standing in the living room of the cabin, surrounded by my family, when we got the news. We were all in shock, and I couldn't believe that my grandfather was gone. But then, at almost the exact moment he passed away, the large mirror over the staircase cracked down the middle. Everyone was too grief-stricken to notice at first, but I couldn't take my eyes off the broken mirror. It was as if something had shattered inside of me, too. After the funeral, we returned to the cabin to pack up my grandparents' belongings. As we were sorting through their things, we heard the sound of breaking glass coming from upstairs. We rushed up to investigate, but found nothing out of the ordinary. Over the years, my family and I continued to experience strange phenomena at the cabin. Several times when we discussed my grandfather, we heard or found broken glass. It was as if his presence lingered in the cabin even after he was gone. But it wasn't until I spent a summer alone at the cabin that things really took a turn for the worse. I had just graduated from college and was looking forward to a summer of relaxation and solitude in the woods. But from the moment I arrived at the cabin, I knew something was different. The air felt thick and heavy, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As the days went on, things only got worse. I heard strange whispers coming from the walls at night and saw shadows moving in the corners of my vision. And then, one night, I saw something that made my blood run cold. I was sitting in the living room, reading a book, when I caught a glimpse of movement in the broken mirror over the staircase. At first, I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But then, I saw my grandfather's face staring back at me, his eyes cold and lifeless. I tried to run, but something held me back. It was as if the cabin itself had come alive, trapping me inside its walls. I could feel my grandfather's presence all around me, his anger and pain radiating from the broken mirror. I knew then that I had to leave the cabin and never look back. As I packed my things and prepared to leave, I heard the sound of breaking glass coming from upstairs. I didn't stop to investigate, but I knew that something had shattered inside of me once again. Now, years later, I still can't bring myself to go back to the cabin. The memories of my grandfather and the broken mirror haunt me, and I can't shake the feeling that something is waiting for me in the woods.